welcome, welcome. Um, just in case we have not met yet, my name is Jenny Gates Beckman, and I am the Director of Community Engagement and Education at the Jewish Federation of Omaha. And I am so pleased to be welcoming you all this evening. It's exciting times now that we're in the phase of programming where we don't necessarily have to be Zooming. People are getting back together again, but this program wouldn't be happening if we couldn't Zoom, because we're all in different locations, our presenters today. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to this three-part series that is brought to you by the Community Engagement and Education arm of the Jewish Federation of Omaha in partnership with the Philip M. and Ethel Klutznick Chair in Jewish Civilization at Creighton University. And your scholars for this evening are the wonderful Dr. Leonard Greenspoon of Creighton, who is well known already in these parts, but I will say that he is the Klutznick Chair in Jewish Civilization at Creighton, and over 30 books he's published, but the one that I like to call out because it's his most recent and it's in heavy rotation in the Kripke Library is Jewish Bible Translations, Personalities, Passions, Politics, and Progress. So you can check that out at the Kripke Library in the Omaha JCC. Just come on over, we have it available. And then he has brought to the table another wonderful scholar, Dr. Anthony. Well, I didn't clarify this beforehand, but I'm thinking Ladon. Ladon? Yes, wonderful. Dr. Anthony Ladon has his PhD from Durham and is equally well respected, but in slightly different circles. He is a widely published authority on Christianity, is professor of New Testament at Union Theological Seminary, and also has published several books. The most interesting of which to me personally was a title called Mere Christianity, How Journeys Along Jewish Christian Borders Saved by Faith in God. So that'll have to be another program, Anthony, to hear more about that.
Forward by one Leonard Greenspoon in that book. So I appreciated that. And I should say it's United Theological Seminary, not to be confused with Union. Oh. It's a common mistake, and no, that's totally fine.
Wonderful. Okay, United. Duly noted. So, topic: dinosaurs, dragons, demons. I'm super pumped for this. The idea for this started because my 2-year-old is in the dinosaur class at the ELC. And I was like, well, someone asked me, well, how do you say dinosaur in Hebrew? Said, well, probably dinosaur or something because it's a modern thing. But it led to questions, and I knew Leonard would have the answers. So Leonard, do you want to start us off and get us going?
Thank you so much, Jenny. I was going to say that this is a play on words, I alert you. The genesis of this idea, because we'll be talking a lot about Genesis, was in fact the email that Jenny sent me. And I'm so happy that we're able to do this. And as Jenny and I talked a little bit about it and said, well, let's get somebody else in, nothing wrong with me, but let's get somebody else in. I said, it's going to be Anthony. And indeed, it is. So I just want to say that a couple of things about Anthony and how it is we know each other. I realized that it's simply a process. As I get older, there are more and more younger scholars. I don't take that as I think that as a bounteous blessing. So Anthony has, when I first met Anthony, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it's got to be, probably before his bar mitzvah, had he been Jewish. But no, I've known him for a very, very long time. And I've shared many meals with him at conventions when we could go to conventions and have meals. And there are two intersections that I want to mention very, very quickly. And one, because my faith in Jenny's been restored, the faith that she pinpointed the book Near Christianity, which is one of Anthony's wonderful books. And he and the publisher asked me to write the foreword for it, which I did. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to do so. And secondly, some years ago, I can't remember where we were, but Anthony and another younger individual who is now president of an institution in Connecticut, academic institution, we were talking at a national meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature, and they said, if it's okay with you, we'd like to organize a Festschrift for you. Well, the Festschrift, which in Politica means festival book, ain't a big thing in the whole world, but in the world of humanities, it's a very big deal. And so Anthony, along with two other young scholars, solicited papers for a volume in my honor, and not lost in translation, and I forget the rest of the title. Anyway, so again, when Jenny and I started talking about it, not a minute passed before I said, let's try to get Anthony. So Anthony, do you want to say a couple of things? We have
Happy to.
We have a sort of a loosely structured program, if or agenda of what things we want to cover tonight. As always, we are informal, and Jenny said if you have questions, you can put them in chat or let Jenny know. Wait to the end, whatever comes to mind. Oh, Anthony, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The title is Found in Translation.
Oh.
Essays in honor of Leonard Greenspoon. And as I recall it, we were having dinner with you, Leonard, and we said, what would you think about a Festschrift in your honor? And I remember you hemmed and hawed, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And I think I said, well, it's not really up to you, Leonard. I think we're gonna do it with or without your permission. So, but we did have your by the end, we did have your permission for sure, which was a blessing for us for sure. My name is Anthony Ladon, and I think that the first thing you need to know about me is that I trust Leonard absolutely implicitly, and maybe to my own fault, because when he called me and said, Anthony, I want you to be involved in this lecture series about dinosaurs, I immediately thought, well, if Leonard thinks that I'm qualified to talk about dinosaurs, then I must be qualified to talk about dinosaurs. I don't have any kind of degree in geology or paleontology or biology, but if Leonard thinks that I'm qualified, then I must be qualified to talk about this. So we'll see. I've never been around to see Leonard be wrong about anything. In my experience, Leonard's always right, but we know that he's human. And so at some point he will fail miserably at something. And maybe tonight's the night. You'll see that I'm not qualified to talk about dinosaurs. And then we'll all see the first time Leonard has failed miserably at something. Let me tell you a little bit about my interest in this topic, and then maybe we can get going. So there are two reasons why I was intrigued by this topic. And the first reason is because my primary research relates to something called social memory theory. So we could say it like this: how a group chooses to reconstruct the past tells us a lot about the remembering group. Right? So if we look at how groups choose to commemorate events in their own seminal history or in world events, that will tell you something about the group that's remembering. In fact, it might tell you more about the group than it does about the event, the historical referent. So I think that there's something about the way that Christians reconstruct the history of human beginnings that tells you probably more about Christians, the Christians who are remembering. And we'll talk about the varieties of ways that people remember or try to reconstruct that particular past. So that interests me. And of course, that cuts both ways. You know, when we're deconstructing how a group commemorates something to tell you about the group, I'm part of a group too, right? So if let's say I sort of want to say the right things, I will parrot the talking points of my in-group. So if I'm, you know, if my progressive in-group likes it when I say certain things but not other things, I have an incentive to say those things. So that tells you a little bit about me and my in-group as well. So social memory theory, it should be interested in this topic. All right, so that's the first reason. The second reason that I'm interested in this is that I love talking with Leonard. I will talk with Leonard about anything. All right, so I've never had an uninteresting conversation with Leonard. I always learn something. I always learn a great deal. I always laugh hard a few times. So I can think of no better way to spend a few evenings than in conversation with Leonard and you all. You find people wherever you may be. So anyway, those are the two reasons why I'm here.
Thank you. It's very generous, overly generous. And we won't talk about my near perfection anymore. So what I thought, one of the points about this is that I can't imagine that there are many people within the Omaha Jewish community, even some in momentary exile like me in Connecticut, who think a lot about the creation of the world and its connection with an interpretation of Genesis 1 and the possible conflicts or resolutions of that with the scientific view. It's really not a topic which I think is primarily on our mind. But as we'll see, it is a topic on a lot of people's minds. Let me just jump ahead for a minute because I'll do some statistics. The general statistic given is that 40% of Americans believe that the world was created between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago on 6 consecutive 24-hour periods. 40% of Americans is a lot of people. Okay, we'll come back to that. And also that this idea, especially over the last few decades, doesn't function just simply as an idea. It's concretized in all kinds of actions. And we'll talk about some of them in terms of the insistence that the quote unquote biblical view of creation be taught in public schools in tandem with or even instead of evolution, and a number of other things. So this, I'm glad that you are here. And again, I say, I don't think it's a topic that's on our mind as much as some other topics on our day-to-day life, but it's something which is part of the general, that is Protestant America in which we live. All right, so what I wanted to start with was a video, and the video comes from something called the Ark Adventure. And I don't know if any of you know about the Ark Adventure. It is described as a Christian Disneyland without rides and without characters who come around and say hello to you. What is it? You will see in a minute, the centerpiece of this Ark Adventure is a quote unquote life-size recreation of the Ark. And this park is located in northwestern Kentucky. It's most easily accessible, I think, via Cincinnati. I have not, I used to go to Cincinnati a lot, haven't been there in some years, I haven't been to this park. Some of you may have. It's a big deal, and it's not the only place where this quote unquote literal view of creation coming out of Genesis is espoused, but it's very, very public. It's very well financed. And there are lots of videos, by the way, on this. What I did was to pick something which was relatively short. It's someone who goes around going to places and videoing them. I think it's a fair representation of what the experience is like. So Jenny, if you could go ahead and just sit back and relax.
All right, so I'm going to be sharing my screen. We'll try and make this as seamless as possible. It's always scary to share your screen, but I've got it pulled up. All right, so we're going to do full screen and then start.
Where's the audio? Are you hearing something?
I'm not hearing anything right now.
Wait. No. What did we do? Hold on, I'm just checking in. You are hearing it. I heard question marks. You're not hearing it. No sound, but you're seeing the visual? All right.
Jenny, why don't you go ahead and play it as is,
Yep.
and I will just I'll just kind of walk
You'll
people
narrate?
through it. I'm happy to give it a try. Yeah, this will be a nice experience in improv theater.
Share
here.
sound. Hold on, let's try this. Let's try one more time.
Excellent.
I think I figured it out. We got it?
Called Ark Encounter.
That's good. Okay, you didn't miss much. I'm just gonna start right here.
That opened to the public in 2016. It was built by a partnership of two organizations, the Young Earth Creationism group Answers in Genesis, and the for-profit corporation Ark Encounter LLC. According to these organizations, the purpose of the park would be to lend credence to the biblical account of a catastrophic flood and to dispel doubts that Noah could have fit 2 of every kind of animal onto a 500-foot-long ark. The park officially opened on July 7th, 2016, a date intentionally chosen to correspond with Genesis 7:7, which states, "And Noah and his sons and wife, and his sons' wives, entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood." When I visited the park, I was struck by the sheer size and magnitude of the operation. Visitors arrive at a massive parking lot, which, if I had to guess, could accommodate somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 vehicles. After passing through admissions, guests then hop aboard one of dozens of large buses that ferry visitors to and from the parking lot every few minutes. Once inside the park, the Ark is quite an impressive sight. Its dimensions of 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet high were chosen by converting the biblical cubit measurements found in the book of Genesis to modern measurements. Now, for those of you wondering, no, this Ark replica is not seaworthy. In a 2016 interview between Answers in Genesis founder Ken Ham and Bill Nye the Science Guy, Ham stated, "We didn't build it to float because there's never going to be another global flood. It was designed as a ship, but built as a building." The inside of the Ark is equally impressive, with 3 massive decks filled with animal enclosures and storage areas, simulating what the layout of the real Noah's Ark from the Bible might have looked like. There is also exhibit upon exhibit depicting biblical accounts of the pre- and post-flood world, as well as the living quarters for Noah and his family. RoadsideAmerica.com rated a handful of the displays depicting the biblical account of the pre-flood world as the most memorable exhibits. Now, if you plan on visiting Ark Encounter for yourself, you should know that there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of visual information to process. The Ark itself is 2 football fields long with 3 decks, and I'm not gonna lie, I felt a little brain dead by the time I reached the exit. It is information overload. On their website, Ark Encounter recommends that you allow for a full day, at least 5 to 6 hours, at the park. A few other things you should know before visiting the park. The organization that operates Ark Encounter, Answers in Genesis, is a fundamentalist Christian apologetics organization. What does that mean? Well, they advocate young earth creationism through a very literal interpretation of the book of Genesis, and they reject any scientific findings that contradict these views. You will find dinosaur exhibits at Ark Encounter, but Answers in Genesis is adamant in their belief that these creatures were created only a few thousand years ago, and only juvenile dinosaurs were taken aboard the real Ark to save space. So no, this is not your typical theme park. My best description for the place would be an Old Testament Disneyland, without the rides and character performers. During your visit, be sure to walk around the petting zoo just outside the Ark and enjoy a buffet-style meal at Mzara's Kitchen, a 1,500 guest capacity restaurant, making it one of the largest in the world. Before you go, if you've been to Ark Encounter, please share a little bit about your visit in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your experience, good or bad. Or if you are planning a visit and have questions, ask away and I'd be happy to answer based on my experience at the park. Anyway, that does it for this video. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What we missed in the beginning was a shot of this humongous parking lot. The guide thinks it will 4,000 cars, and you go and you buy a ticket. The particular view we had, people were masked because it was sometime during the pandemic, and then you take a bus and to get to where this Ark is. Now, granted, there's not a lot about dinosaurs in this particular presentation. It seems to me, and as always, I'm guided by, that is said, corrected by Anthony, but it seems as if people for whom Genesis 1 is taken, quote unquote, literally, there is a fascination with, I might even say, obsession with dinosaurs. And as I understand it, the actual Ark that you encounter, if you go to Ark Encounter, there's lots of dinosaur exhibits, as it were. And I guess, although I don't know this for sure, I'm guessing this interest in dinosaurs is one, because dinosaurs were indeed huge animals, and their fossils have been found in many places and are very impressive, and therefore are part of the Paleolithic, paleographic history of the world, the prehistory history of the world. And they have been used, in fact, to date within a fairly wide scholarly consensus of when dinosaurs lived. And there is, again, the general scientific consensus that when dinosaurs lived was well before humans in any form existed. Okay, we'll talk about that at some point. Right now, I'm just trying to explain why I sort of went from Jenny's child's question about dinosaurs to the Ark Encounter. Another thing is that, again, for those who are beginning with or ending with a what we call a literal interpretation of the account, two of every single animals, minimally two of every single animals was on the Ark. How on the earth could dinosaurs have fit on the Ark? There's different views that creationists offer. One is they just took babies on. That's not an issue we have to consider at the moment. Although, again, if we'll look at this more closely next week. But if you look at the account in Genesis 1 and you take it, again, I keep saying quote unquote, literally, dinosaurs and humans were created on the same day. They clearly coexist, and they would have been on the ship. and it is a tenet, if you will, T-E-N-E, tenet, yeah, T-E-N-E-T, of a basic belief of this group of people that we start with the biblical text. It is, quote unquote, I'll stop saying quote unquote now, literally true. And the only area where there's a little bit of difference, so far as I can tell, in the hardcore is exactly how many years old the biblical text asserts the universe is. So we have, of course, our Jewish dating, and we're told the Jewish year is it's this many years since creation. That's one understanding. A famous, I guess it was a Protestant minister, Bishop Usher, came up with another one a couple of centuries ago, and they're all different ways of doing it. And that's why, in most discussions of this, it's anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Okay. Did I see that in the chat there was somebody here who's been to the Ark encounter? And I don't know, I'm not sure who it was, I can't remember. If feel free to interject anymore if you'd like to at any point. Let's say I have not been to the Ark encounter. Were I to return to Cincinnati, and the reason I would go to Cincinnati is because I do work on the in the archives that are at Hebrew Union College. I might be tempted to go there, but it ain't cheap, and I don't know that I would feel like I want to be another number in there, another notch on their attendance. But I think this was a fair idea of conceptualization, or even, I guess we say, realization of what a lot of people, a sizable number of people in the United States believe. And I think there was a comment, it's hard to believe it's 40%. And in fact, in a minute or two, or it could be 10 minutes from now, but in a few minutes, I'll come back to these numbers, and we'll sort of tease them out, because it may not be 40%. It may be 30%. Some would,
yeah, between 30 and 60 is
yes.
usually the numbers. Now, I will say a couple things about Ark Encounter, Leonard. So I knew that I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I knew that when we started talking about this a couple months ago, that I was going to be driving from Louisville to Dayton. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do right by Leonard, I really should go to Ark Encounter, just so I can have the experience and share my experience of the place. And I went online and I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to cost me $40. Okay, I can do it. I can pay $40, see a big depiction of Noah's Ark. I'll walk around, I'll observe. And so I did that. I went to Ark Encounter. I was on my way back. I only had to drive 30 minutes out of the way to go to, and I went to the giant parking lot, and I saw the enormous Ark from the parking lot. And then they were going to charge me $10 to park. And that was a bridge too far. I felt like, no, I will pay $40 for a ticket, but I will not pay $10 to park. And so I decided, I'm sorry. I thought Leonard's, I love Leonard, but I love him for $40, not for $50. So I turned around and I drove home, and I at least I got to see the Ark from the drive. Now, I will say one other thing. I used to work at an institution in Central Illinois called Lincoln Christian University, and they have a chapel that they built to the specifications of Noah's Ark. Not in terms of what it would have looked like inside or outside, just a big concrete building. But they made it as wide, as tall, and as deep as Noah's Ark would have been. And my office was in that building. So I used to work in Noah's Ark. Anyway, Leonard, do you want to move on to some of the terminology here, or did you want to say more about that?
All I wanted to do was say the next thing we're going to talk about is terminology, and I'm going to turn it over to Anthony.
Okay, wonderful. All right, here's what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to tell you a little story. It's autobiographical, and I'm going to sneak in some terminology here, and I'll pause and call it out when I sneak it in. It's about me as a young man, and the two words that I'm going to sneak in are young earth creationism. That's one term, and the other term is intelligent design. I'll sneak both of those in. All right. So when I was a high school freshman, my church youth group went to see an astrophysicist named Hugh Ross. Dr. Ross was a popular speaker on intelligent design. There's the first word. In this case, intelligent design meant that scientists could read Genesis chapter 1 side by side with a contemporary science textbook and find both beneficial and mutually informative. Dr. Ross argued for a form of Christian theology that granted that the earth is over 4 billion years old and that life on earth evolved over the course of 3.5 billion years. Crucial to this view was the idea that God, as creator, guided the expansion of the universe and guided evolution in a very precise way. In fact, the divine hand was so precise, according to Dr. Ross, that if not for divine guidance, no life would be possible without it. Earlier today, I called a Christian pastor friend of mine just to say, hey, did I remember this right? Because we were both both went to this lecture as youths. And according to my Christian pastor, this is still how he sees it. My Christian pastor friend said, yeah, I would say that this is a moment of special creation. That's how he determines it. So what Dr. Ross called as a precise guidance of evolution is what my friend, the Pastor Mark, still believes. So Hugh Ross embraced something called intelligent design, and I wanted to embrace intelligent design. Remember that I'm 13 years old. Okay, so my guess, many Christians who embrace science are attracted to this form of intelligent design. For me, as a young fundamentalist Christian, it allowed me to continue to read Genesis as a kind of history. But I didn't have to fight my biology teachers at school over the age of the earth. It allowed me to do both things. So I became a big fan of Dr. Ross and subscribed to his apologetics newsletter and purchased some of his educational materials. I was a big fan. He was living proof that Christians didn't need to be ignorant or against mainstream science. And as you can probably tell, I was keenly interested in maintaining my own place within my faith community as much as anything else. By embracing intelligent design in the way that I did, it was good for me, but it did create a wedge in my other relationships. It put a wedge in my relationship between me and my church's youth pastor. His name was Brad. Brad was warm, generous, goofy, and really honestly cared for my spiritual well-being and my personal growth. The Christian faith, as Brad saw it, required a belief in young earth creationism. That's the second key term, young earth creationism. Sometimes you see it abbreviated as YEC in literature. So Brad believed that right Christian theology required the belief in young earth creationism. This, by the way, is what 30 to 60% of American Christians believe. Human life happened pretty much how Genesis describes it. Not with evolution and not over millions of years. Young earth creationism holds that God created all of life in 6 days and created life in family sets or basic types. In other words, dogs can evolve into different sorts of dogs, but dogs and human do not come from the same primordial soup. Brad believed that God did not create the world by evolution, so there was no primordial soup. Because of this, Brad was worried about my faith, and I was worried about my standing within the church of my youth. I wanted to have my soup and eat it too. That's the key term, young earth creationism, and that's to be disassociated with intelligent design. There may be some overlap, which we can talk about, but those are two distinctly different camps within the Christian world. So at 13 years old, I find myself between two warring Christian camps. Those who embrace the findings of mainstream evolutionary science, Dr. Ross's camp, and those who believed that the Triceratops was created on the sixth day of creation, Youth Pastor Brad's camp. These camps were entrenched and ideologically certain, or at least that's how it seemed to me as a high schooler. Now, I need to give Youth Pastor Brad some credit here. Part of his worry about intelligent design was that it would also include this camp, the Dr. Ross camp, would also include folks who believe that Genesis is a bit of ancient poetry that conveys a myth. Brad wasn't just worried about the Dr. Ross types who tried to read Genesis alongside science textbooks. Brad was worried about the folks on the far left, from his perspective, who didn't believe in a literal Adam and Eve, because lots of intelligent design folks simply hold that the universe began with an intelligent designer. So according to intelligent design, you don't have to subscribe to any particular religion or creed. You don't need to be a Christian to believe in intelligent design. And if I fell into that camp, as Brad was worried about, I might eschew my faith entirely. And Brad was half right. All right. So I didn't eschew my faith, but I did come to believe that Genesis is a beautifully constructed poem conveying a particular creation myth. And as such, I become even more liberal than Dr. Ross. And so Pastor Brad, his worry was pretty well founded. I ended up falling down the slippery slope. Now he's not, Pastor Brad's no longer with us. All right, so he's not here, but if he were alive and if he were listening now, he would probably consider me something other than a true Christian. That's how he would perceive me. And this last bit is important because we should understand how wide the spectrum is among these Christians. Those of us on the progressive end of intelligent design tend to look unchristian to those in the young earth camp. By the way, young Youth Pastor Brad would also place Einstein, for instance, in the intelligent design camp. Einstein, from the young earth creationist perspective, is admirable, but without the necessary theology to be correct when it comes to God. Now, my guess here is that Einstein is something of a stand-in for the scientific community at large. And by the way, according to a 2009 Pew Research survey, nearly all scientists, 97%, hold that humans came to be via evolution. So 97%. Moreover, because most of these scientists never mention God in their research, they are seen as even more liberal than Einstein. And so from a Youth Pastor Brad perspective, the vast majority of scientists were simply untrustworthy and dangerous to my eternal salvation. Okay, I'm going to pass the podium back to Leonard, but I hope that I've given you a few useful categories. Intelligent design is a big umbrella term that refers to anyone who believes in a creator who guided the process of life on Earth. Young Earth creationism may have some overlap, but in my experience, the young Earth camp is very suspicious of the intelligent design camp and worried that teaching intelligent design to young people will contribute to a journey that will eventually lead to atheism. All right, that was my experience as a 13-year-old.
Thank you, Anthony. And I appreciate that you're the only one who could give us this experience from your perspective. As I was mentioning a little earlier, the percentages, and someone, and perhaps put on, I think it was, well, I know who it was, put it in the chat. This seems incredible. The number seems too large. And I just want to take a minute to talk about these statistics, because while I don't doubt that somewhere between 30 and 60% of Americans take a young earth creationism, as Anthony so well described it, point of view, I don't know if 30 to 60% is that's a big difference, even though 30% is pretty substantial. So first, I just wanted to point out that, as Anthony mentioned, the Pew Charitable Trust, which does all kinds of surveys, a number of surveys have been done. The one that the 40% is typically based on is a Gallup poll. And one thing I know about Gallup polls is that they pride themselves on being able to compare from year to year, decade to decade, because they don't change their questions. I know this because I tried to convince them to change a question once about something dealing with the Bible. And they said, yes, Dr. Greenspoon, that's a very good idea, but no, we're not going to change it. So we can chart based on the Gallup poll. And here's the questions. These are the questions that were asked, or the choices that were given. You, as the person filling out the survey, which of the following statements comes closest to your views on the origin and development of human beings? These are three choices. First, human beings have evolved over millions of years from other forms of life, and God guided the process. That would seems certainly within intelligent design. Number two, human beings have evolved over millions of years from other forms of life, but God had no part in the process. That's certainly a possible way in which the quote unquote scientifically proficient look at it. But of course, as with Einstein, that's certainly not, it doesn't have to be that way. And third, God created human beings in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years. God created human beings in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years. That is young earth creationism, as I understand it. When this survey was given originally in the 80s, and it's been given over the decades, approximately 40 to 45% of the people who respond with what we are calling the young earth creationist answer. God created human beings in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years. Okay, such people, therefore, to get back to our topic, such people are bound to believe that since humans and dinosaurs and humans, along with lots of other animals, were created on the same day, the sixth day, they coexisted. There is nothing extraordinary about that, because that just follows from this belief. What's interesting about this is that we could perhaps phrase these questions differently and come up with slightly different numbers. And the example, an example that was given in some of the material I looked at was from a Harris poll, also well-respected polling organization. And so they found that the number of people who responded to this question, do you believe all plants and animals have evolved from other species or not? Do you believe all plants and animals have evolved from other species or not? And that would get 50% believe yes. And then I don't know exactly how they did it, but they asked this question: do you believe human beings developed from earlier species or not? And the number went from 50 to 30. That's 20%. That's statistically significant. How people respond to these questions is certainly related to how the question is phrased. I don't think that it's possible that there's not some considerable number of Americans who believe in young earth creationism. And I thought about a couple of other things that are mentioned here, and one that I know from some other research I've done. For example, the number of Americans who believe that the sun rotates around the earth based on the statement in Joshua chapter 10, which as a translation expert, I can tell you you could translate more than one way, but traditionally it's translated, or typically it's translated, Joshua said, sun stand still. and then the sun stood still and the moon stood still. Well, if the sun and moon aren't moving, how could Joshua tell them to stand still? And there are a considerable number of people who believe, in spite of what I thought was a pretty universal consensus, that the Earth is at the center of the universe. Okay, or the solar system. Well, it wouldn't be a solar system, but I guess it would be a human system. Another one that I remember, and I wasn't able to find the numbers. One of the big ribs chains is there a ribs chain. Tony Roma is I don't know. I don't eat many ribs, but some big chain that specializes in ribs asked their clientele, do men and women have the same number of ribs? And some considerable number, I don't remember, again, it was certainly a lot more than one. It may not have been 70%, but some considerable number of people said men and women do not have the same number of ribs because God took out one of Adam's ribs to make Eve. That being the case, all men descended from Adam have one less rib than women do. Go figure. These are, as I guess we'd say, these are sort of facts on the ground. Again, it gets back, as it were, it sort of gets back, as it were, to our topic, which is where we, again, we sort of started with dinosaurs. And let me take a minute, we're not by any means finished, but let's take a minute to explain what Anthony and I believe this is what we're going to be doing for the next two classes. In the next session, it's not a class, in the next session, we'll be looking at the biblical account in Genesis 1, and we can ask a question from perhaps a different perspective. Why don't we read Genesis 1, quote unquote, literally? There it is, 6 days. Is there some special word in the Hebrew for days here that elsewhere? Why don't we? And we'll look at that. I simply point out in passing that the literal reading of the biblical text is not a feature of Judaism. Doesn't mean that no Jews do that, but it's not a feature of Judaism. It's not a feature of Roman Catholicism. It is a feature of Protestantism, deeply ingrained as I understand it. And this is a Protestant country. And then we're going to look at the way in which Jews and Christians understood the creation, and then again understood the connection between dinosaurs and humans, as well as dragons and humans, as well as a lot of other unicorns and humans, if you will, before the scientific revolution, and which we'll talk about more in the third session. Also, next time we will answer the question, which again, I don't know that this has been on your mind all that much, but it is on some people's minds. Are there dinosaurs in the Bible? Well, it may seem as almost, it's a facetious question. It's not really a facetious question at all. I believe I read somewhere that the term dinosaur didn't develop until the 19th century as a technical term. I don't know if that's true or not true, but dinosaur-like creatures, are they mentioned in the Bible? And if so, off the top of our fertile imaginations, or fertile knowledge, we could think of maybe the behemoth. A behemoth is a dinosaur, or maybe a leviathan is a dinosaur, or you will not find dinosaur in the JPS translations that we use. You will not find dinosaur in the Art Scroll translations that we use. You will not find dinosaur many translations, but there's a long tradition about that. Anthony, we're opening to questions, but we're open to questions all the time. So Jenny, do you have some issues people are things people have raised that we think we want to talk about?
I think at this point, the major questions you've addressed, but I would welcome anyone. You can either do the hand raise function if you know how to use that, or pop something in the chat, or also unmute yourself briefly. You know, if we're sticking to the timeline. Yeah.
I had a question for both. Have you done any work with the monogenist versus polygynist controversy and its relationship to racial issues?
That's a great, I think it certainly has some relevance to this conversation. Leonard and I did talk a little bit about that as an issue. And I think that, I think what we resolved, Leonard, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that we thought we might postpone that for a later session. But I'm glad you brought it up, because it absolutely has some bearing on this topic. Because if we imagine that human life and human society began shortly after Noah's flood, then this story about, you know, Ham and the curse of Ham starts to have really sort of this textual primacy, and creates this sort of early colonial mythology. Is that kind of what you had in mind, or were you heading a different direction?
No, that was, thank you.
It just so happens, as by chance, if coincidence does indeed exist, that I was writing an article today, and I was actually cribbing from myself when we looked at, I was looking at sermons written just before the Civil War, some by Protestant ministers, but some by rabbis. And there was a widespread school of thought that the so-called curse of Ham, which actually was devolved on his son Canaan, was blackness. And that, and then the text says, to Canaan you will be the slaves or the servants of your brothers and other people. And that was used, it may be used today. Think that where Anthony and I were talking about is critical race theory, and critical race theory has taken on a life of its own, and it's certainly something we can talk about to the extent I think that I can fully understand it. Is that about right, Anthony? Yeah. Yeah.
I remember too, you know, it was not just theologians who put the Bible to use to support slavery, for example, but also scientists, medical people were involved. And I remember the old thing of there was a disease called drapetomania, which was in the early 1800s, and it was considered an ailment that escaped slaves were assumed to have, that if they ran away, they must be deprived of oxygen, that their brains were not working right. So a way to fix that was considered to oxygenate them by whipping them.
There's no question that science has been abused nowhere with more dire results than the pseudoscience that supported the Holocaust. Yes, and you're absolutely right about that. My specific interest in topics like this, because Anthony talked about his, and it's absolutely appropriate and perfectly authentic. Mine is specifically on the way in which the biblical text is interpreted, or let's say misinterpreted, to devolve certain beliefs. And then you're absolutely right. Beliefs generally do not just stay out there, and particularly in more recent times, people act upon them with serious consequences. And yes.
So there are a couple more questions in the chat that are along the same lines, and I'm going to put them out there, and I'll add that perhaps they'll be a good starting point for next next Monday's session. But we have a question. How do the young Earth creationists explain the disappearance of the dinosaurs, and on what are folks who subscribe to the YEC basing the inclusion of the dinosaurs on the Ark? You know.
Yeah. The second question first, probably, because the fifth, according to Genesis 1, the fifth day included creatures of the air and sea. And on the sixth day, these land animals, right? So the belief here, according to like people behind Ark Encounter, like the fellow named Ken Ham, who kind of is the big brain behind Ark Encounter, Ken would say basically that every land animal of every kind was included on the Ark, so to survive the flood. And so it must have been the dinosaur youths, to save space, were included. I think that, I'm not sure if that's a complete answer, but I think that that's probably pretty close to a succinct answer. The second question about the disappearance of dinosaurs, I think that there's going to be different views on this depending on which Christian you talk to. I think some young Earth folks would say, yeah, we don't know, like we're not sure. We kind of know how the dodo went extinct because that was more of a modern problem. We don't know how a lot of species went extinct. Some folks, and you'll find them on the internet. The internet's a wild place. Some folks say the dinosaurs are still with us if you just look hard enough. They're not as big as they used to be before, but they're still around. So I mean, that's how some folks would answer that question.
Look, count me a avowed and proud Loch Ness Monster believer. Now, the Loch Ness Monster may or may not be it's some kind of dragon, and it irrefutably it doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean I'll stop believing in it at some level. Yeah, this is really, if I may just take one more minute, this is a really good way to in our minds to start. And we're going to be sure we're not going to have only talking about dinosaurs and dragons, but we're going to be talking about the next week, especially as to whether or not, what if they were created and you believe that the Bible contains all information, then they're going to be there. I have to admit, Jenny, I apologize because I love alliteration. Like my book has 4, so we had dinosaurs and dragons, and I needed another D, and I came up with demons. And you accept, but I'm not sure whether we're going to be talking about demons, although we might.
We could very well could. We've been talking a lot about Noah's flood. We could easily go to the book of Jubilees and talk about the origin of demons related to Noah's flood.
That's fantastic. Well, I do want to be conscious of our time tonight. Do you want to give any preview as to next time, or are we good to sign off for the evening?
Maybe just one more point to drive home that the wider relevance to this topic. So according to I sent you out a link to a Pew research sort of findings. It's a PDF. It's in the chat. If you can find that in the chat, there's a link there. So what you're going to find there is that you're going to see that among white American Christians, 60 or more people disbelieve evolution. All right. And as I said before, 97% of scientists do believe that life evolved on Earth. That puts 60% of these white evangelicals or white Christians at odds with science, not just scientists, science. And I think
what about Black Christians?
That's I would have to look at that survey more carefully. I'm not sure how big of the difference that would be, but I guess my point
Probably
is
not much.
my point would be that we see a lot of pushback against science in this country, pushback against climate science, pushback against some of our COVID people that want to save our lives, using science to save human life, and we see a lot of pushback against these things because there's this rift between millions of Christians in this country and the scientific community, and that rift has major consequences beyond what's taught in the classroom. These have consequences for how we will approach critical race theory, or how we approach how to combat a global pandemic, or how we combat climate change. And I think that this is sort of an entry in issue, but in some ways it's sort of it really does reveal an essential rift in American culture.
Oh yeah, especially with the critical race theory. Yeah, I think that's a legitimate criticism for people who debunk that. I mean, that is real dangerous theory.
I don't want to cut off anybody or be presumptuous, but we will, as we talk about the larger issues, I'm going to focus us on dinosaurs and dragons and the Bible, because that's what my interest is, and because that's a starting point. It's not the ending point, but certainly a starting point. So we'll be going lots of different directions.
Mm-hmm. So next week, we'll probably talk about the specific texts and how different folks from different religious backgrounds view these texts. And I'm hoping to hear Leonard, who is a real life expert on Bible translation, walk us through Genesis 1. I can't wait.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank both of you for being fantastic facilitators of this evening and the whole series, and spread the word that this is where it's at. We're going to pop this recording on the JFO YouTube channel so that others can catch up and join us next time. So thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week.